Fiat's new Tempra represents a bold attempt by the company to move what is essentially a Tipo-sized car with a boot into the upper medium sector, where it'll be up against cars like the Sierra and Cavalier in the UK. Now, looking at the car, you might have thought it was more of a competitor for other booted versions of smaller hatchbacks like Ford's Orion and Volkswagen's Jetta. But Fiat maintain that moving up a class is justified by the quality and refinement they've built into it. Fiat say they've gone to great lengths to try and eliminate any shakes or rattles in the inside of the Tempra. It comes with two levels of trim. This is the SX version, and with it you get a rather garish electronic digital dashboard. Personally, I prefer the simple analog instruments of the base version. But you do get quite a sophisticated heating and ventilation system with optional automatic electronic temperature control. It's nicely trimmed inside. You get a folding armrest that's very comfortable, except you can't get the handbrake on very easily when it's down. But apart from that, plenty of elbow room, lots of leg room, and plenty of headroom too. Certainly competes well with the Cavalier Sierra class. The boot lid opens quite wide, but the lock looks rather hazardous to an unguarded forehead. Plenty of space in the boot for 3 suitcases. We've put a couple of bags in as well, but you'd have to unload everything to get at the spare wheel, which lives under the boot floor. Power steering is only an option on this 1.6-litre version. I think it's almost essential. Power steering itself is a very nice system. It's nicely weighted, it's not too heavy, it gives you a very good feel of the road, and it also enables you to place the car very precisely and to exploit the excellent road holding. It's something that presumably you would buy this Fiat for over a Sierra or a Cavalier. It's well balanced, it doesn't understeer or oversteer, and if you had to escape from an emergency situation at speed, the car would stay very much on your side. It's fun to drive, but ultimately very safe. You can get into quite a comfortable driving position in the Tempra. The seats are supportive round the bends, and the steering wheel's at the right angle for me. You can adjust it up and down. Italians have concentrated all the minor controls on 2 stalks on either side of the wheel. Once you get used to it, it's a very convenient way of grouping them. There are 1.4, 1.6 and 1.8 injection engines available. This is the 1.6. It's got quite nice mid-range punch, but it's hardly the Italian brio that we used to get with their old twin-cam engines a few years ago, where you just let it scream its head off to get the ultimate in performance and hang low-down torque and flexibility. You can see why the Italians have done it, of course. They've got to appeal to a much bigger European market, but in doing that, you sometimes think they may have lost a little bit of their flair and character. So does Fiat's experiment to move Tempra upmarket succeed? Certainly it's quiet, refined and quite enjoyable, but it's against stiff opposition in a fiercely competitive market sector. It certainly won't be an easy task to make it a winner. The car will be launched in Britain this summer, and we'll know Fiat's pricing structure then. So to sum up, the Tempra scores well on its refinement and handling. It's got very good aerodynamics, and all external panels are made from galvanized steel. On the minus side, there's that digital dashboard and only average performance. There was a slight gearbox whine too on our test car, and although I like armrests, I do like to be able to put on the handbrake. Although almost every part of the latest Honda Accord is new, the car seems very much like an enlarged version of the old model. Wheelbase goes up by 5 inches and height by 1.5 inches. Also inflated is the price. Honda seem to be capitalizing on their reputation for quality, reliability and design, with a definite move upmarket for what was their Sierra rival. Although the base model is £12,000, this 2-litre EXI is expected to be the most popular. It's priced at just over £15,000. That's nearly £1,500 more than the old model. But it's still a bargain compared with the £19,000 top-of-the-range model with four-wheel steering. For Japan, the Accord can be ordered with 5 cylinders, but all cars sold in Britain are 16-valve 4s. The 2-litre injection now gives 133 horsepower, and there are more sophisticated engine mounts for quietness. And headlights are interesting, clear lenses with complex moulded reflectors. As you'd expect, the increase in exterior dimensions has been reflected in the interior, and this new Accord is now a very roomy car indeed. In particular, there's very good headroom, and that's something that the early models were criticised for. In fact, there's even room to use the power seat to take you well up in the world. Rear passengers get lots of legroom. The whole cabin gives a feeling of quietness and solidity. That's in part due to a new floor construction using a honeycomb structure, and the dashboard is also a new idea. They put the heating and ventilating ducts moulded inside it, and the whole lot is then clamped to the front of the car, and that means there's nothing inside to shake about and rattle. Very high level of standard equipment. You get cruise control, you get air conditioning, you get anti-lock brakes, very nice stereo radio, electric windows as you'd expect, and electrically controlled and heated door mirrors. However, the legendary quality control isn't infallible. In this Japanese-built car, we found one tiny area of poor paint finish, already going rusty. Despite that, the new car is most impressive. Handling is tidy, but more noticeable is the improvement in the ride, which could be rather coarse on the old car. Performance is excellent and delivered with great smoothness. The car remains quiet up to very high speeds, and the engine readily spins round to high revs with absolutely no fuss. Honda have also developed their speed-sensitive power steering system to remove its tendency to become over light at lower speeds or over heavy after braking. At cavalier prices, the Honda Accord was always a strong competitor in its market sector. But is it up to competing with cars like BMW's 520i? Well, one Honda dealer we spoke to maintains that the people who bought their first Accord 5 years ago are now that much better off, and he thinks they'll stick to the car they value so much.
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you're the chairman of General Motors, Hank J. Dieselberger III of Detroit, Michigan. You own 37% of Isuzu, which makes a small Jeep just like this, called the Amigo. You also own all of Vauxhall, which desperately wants a small Jeep to cash in on a huge demand for them in Europe. So you introduce Mr. Okinawa of Isuzu to Mr. Fotherington Sorbet of Vauxhall, and hey presto, Isuzu increases its sales, and Vauxhall, for rather less than the price of a packet of cornflakes, gets its small Jeep, which it is making in Britain from British steel using German engines. The only Japanese bits are the dashboard and the four-wheel drive system. As a neat finishing touch, it's being sold here not as an Isuzu, but as the Vauxhall Frontera Sport. Now, before you rush off to make supper thinking I'm about to start talking about Range Rover money, I think it's important to stress right now that this rather butch-looking machine is yours for just £12,250. Why so cheap? Well, to find out, you have to scratch beneath the surface. Superficially, at least, the interior all seems to be very well trimmed. I've got tasteful upholstery and a good thick leather wheel here. Okay, some of the switchgear's a bit daft. These light buttons are very difficult to find at night, but you can live with that. What you can't live with quite so easily is that all the choice little toys, the electrically adjustable heated door mirrors, the electric windows, the central locking and so on, are all expensive extras. It rather looks as though the original item was designed by someone who took his inspiration from old Mother Hubbard's cupboard. And then there's the underneath. Now, the rear end is suspended not on coil springs, as you might imagine, but on sort of rickshaw technology that looks like it's come off a piece of farm machinery. But do not for one moment think this is aimed at the farmer who needs something to round up his Friesians. With its garish paintwork and a 2-litre engine lifted straight out of the Vauxhall Cavalier, It's aimed instead at the person who is fed up with paying through the nose to ensure a hot hatchback. If you are used to a hot hatchback, you'll find the Frontera, well, how can I be tactful, a bit slow. 0 to 60 takes a pedestrian 12 seconds and top speed is noisy. Furthermore, it isn't all that sparing with the jungle juice, using a gallon of unleaded every 25 miles or so. Now, these figures may well disappoint those coming to it from, say, an Astra GTE, but as far as Jeeps go, they're not half bad. The same applies with the ride and handling. Those used to conventional hatchbacks will find the Frontera bouncy and wallowy, but those coming to it from, say, a Suzuki Vitara or a Daihatsu Sport Track should, I think, be pleasantly surprised. It is, however, very easy to drive. You've got power steering, a light gearbox, and a good view thanks to this high seating position. Even your granny could handle this, no problem at all. Statistics show that 80% of people who buy so-called small Jeeps never ever take them off-road. This means they're putting up with all the disadvantages without ever utilising the one big advantage. It's a bit like buying a Lamborghini Diablo and refusing to take it out of first gear. I know that if I had a Frontera, I'd never be able to resist the temptation, just once in a while, to ease it into four-wheel drive and go yomping.
I've lived so long near the mountain, it's almost part of me. I wanna have it behind me. It blocks out all I can see. It looms up dark and ancient. Its shadow over me.
Vauxhall have produced a booklet all about driving responsibly in the countryside. Unfortunately, I never read it.
All that time, all that precious time, it's gone.
Now, I'm not going to be daft and say it doesn't have the off-road ability of a Range Rover, because of course it doesn't. It only costs a third as much. But if you are one of the leisure generation and you really do go bungee jumping in your coffee break, it will get to places that your average hot hatch couldn't. What's more, it will get there no matter what the weather is doing. You'll also be able to get a lot of people in here. There's space in the front for a couple of prop forwards, and in the back, unlike most Jeeps of this type, there really is space for a couple of people, especially if you take the roof off. However, there is one problem. The boot. It's so small, just about the only piece of leisure equipment you can get inside is a pair of wellies. Now, to counter this criticism, Vauxhall is also marketing a 5-door estate version, but it too has problems with the boot, or rather the tailgate. The problem is, to open it, even enough to get your shopping in, you have to move this substantial piece of ironmongery out of the way, which is a problem if someone's parked up close behind you. Still, once done, split folding affair like on a Range Rover, and there's enough space in there very nearly to get a quad bike. Other problems? Well, it's not quite as stylish as the Sport, and if you go for the diesel version, as we've got here, your neighbours won't think you're the funniest person in the world when you start it up in the morning. Big noise. As far as the Frontera Sport is concerned, I liked its looks, its terrific value for money, and with 580 dealers, spare parts aren't exactly hard to come by. It is burdened, however, with a lumpy ride, wonky switches, and a tiny boot.
England expected the dear old Metro to take on the world. And while the world may not have gone for it, you see a few in France and Italy, the car meant to replace the Mini certainly took the home market by the ears. The British motoring public bought it in their thousands.
A British car to beat the world.
A sensible little car is what most people think of used Metros. An unintimidating small hatchback, a motorised shopping trolley, ideal for trundling round the garden centres or squeezing into little spaces at the supermarket. Metros may be easy to park, cheap to insure and run on fumes, but are they any good for more demanding motoring?
Not really. The new Metro, launched last year, is a much, much better car. It may look the same on top, but it's vastly different underneath. But the old Metro is simply too rough, too temperamental, too aged and too unrefined to be taken seriously as a second-hand car. And this is our point, that the old Metro has all the finesse and the subtlety of a thumb in the eye, and that for more or less the same money, there are much, much better second-hand cars. Take a look at any similarly aged Fiesta, Polo, Nova, Peugeot 205, and not only will they look fresher and be less rusty, they will drive and ride infinitely better.
This year's Which Car Buying Guide puts it like this. All 83 to 88 models were below average for rust. On reliability, they said that the Metro 1000 is looking poor and the Metro 1300 is worse than average. Other small cars, however, didn't fare quite so badly.
I suppose the leader in the field, you would have to say, probably as a result of good build quality, is probably the Polo, the Volkswagen Polo. But the Fiesta and the Nova are both very close behind. There are others, of course. But all three of those, the Polo, the Fiesta, the Nova, pound for pound, they're going to give you better value and more reliable motoring, I would say, than the same age Metro.
Now, the motor trade say that the only thing an old Metro does well is rust, and they'd be right. Take a look at the appalling condition of the front wings on this 85 50,000 mile MG. Now, you just don't see Peugeot 205s and Fiesta XR2s of the same age with this sort of advanced corruption.
That's not to say most of them look this bad. Austin Rover did offer a rust warranty, which had to be inspected every year, and many owners simply didn't bother, thus voiding their warranty. Newer cars have problems too, like this D-Reg with its bubbling front wings. And even this 88E registration is starting to look a touch scabrous in some rather surprising places.
The Metro does have a name for being probably the rustiest of the small hatchbacks. It's probably deserved as well, because the front wings do rust. The front valance, that's the panel below the front bumper, also rusts. And both areas are quite noticeable, even at quite a young age. However, it's not the end of the world. The front wings are bolt-on, so they're quite easily changed. The front valance panel is fairly easily changed by a body shop. The whole job can be done probably for less than £200, including a good paint job. So it really is not the end of the world.
It's not all rosy with the mechanics either. Crankshafts can fail at as little as 30,000 miles, which means big bills. Gearboxes, particularly on pre-88 cars, can cause problems, again at quite low mileages. And on older Metros, watch the rear radius arms. They're part of the rear suspension. There are more problems with the hydrogas suspension units themselves. Uneven tyre wear is the clue.
In extreme cases, you can get this rather drunken body lean, but you can pump the suspension units up again to sobriety at about a tenner a go. But equally, you could be faced with replacing one or maybe two of the suspension units at 130 quid a corner. And don't expect any rushes of adrenaline from behind the wheel. This driving position comes straight out of a double-decker, and for a bloke like me, the dinky little seats would keep an osteopath in work for months. On the motorway, it's a buzz box, and on anything less than a billiard table, it rattles like a tin tray full of crockery. But perhaps I'm being a bit too beastly to the dear little Metro. There are plenty of people who love the Group 1 insurance, the economy, the front-wheel drive handling, and are perfectly happy just bumbling about.
But one surprise is that pre-1989 versions won't run on unleaded without a pricey £400 conversion.
There's even an automatic Metro, as driven by all the best blue rinsers. But unless you've got a sense of humour, the demented wailing of the little box that sings up and down the gears could well put you off. The auto box also makes the front end very heavy, so there's an awful lot of steering effort required. That was second gear, that's third gear, and fourth gear at 28 miles an hour. So really, it's got all the performance and agility of the Albert Memorial.
Price-wise, reckon on used Metros being around 400 quid less than a similar Fiesta or Nova. But think hard, it might be a false economy.
It's not a nice car to drive, and it takes a lot of maintenance to keep it running properly. But having said that, it's a practical town car. It carries a lot in the back with the seats folded down, and it nearly always does 40 to the gallon.
I accept that there's going to be the odd stone chip on the front, but rust is erupting all the way up the bonnet and along the doors. I certainly wouldn't have another one. I've had two already, and that's enough.
It's falling apart at the seams. We've had trouble with the sunroof leaking, the battery keeps going, we've got holes in the wings where the rust has become a great problem. We've had a new spoiler on it, it keeps breaking down. I'm always having to phone work in the morning to say I'm going to be late in. It's not much fun. And when you're driving a young son around, it's not much fun either. Basically, I wouldn't buy another one if you paid me.
So if you really want to drive the flag, we say go for the latest Metro. Only problem is the cheapest second-hand ones are still around the £5,000 mark.
And if the budget won't stretch to one of those, we recommend you go for a Mini instead. Chances are it'll be more fun, hold its value longer, and stand a sporting chance of starting in the morning.
Now, which niche of the executive market does the Alfa 164 Lusso Automatic drop into? Well, it's for those with a generous budget at their disposal and a fleet manager who isn't too worried by the prospect of steep depreciation. Perhaps Saab have attracted more executives to their models, but there can't be many middle management transport budgets which will stretch to accommodate this CD version. Maybe it's moved above the market it was originally aimed at. A substantially cheaper choice would be the equivalent model from Lancia's Thema range, but not enough user-choosers exercise their privilege to keep the Lancia importer independent. It's now firmly back under Fiat's wing. Now, the thing that unites all these cars is money, not what it costs to buy them in the showroom, but what it costs to develop them. Because all three cars, plus incidentally the Fiat Croma, share the same floor pan. The manufacturers got together and they pooled their resources to come up with a new executive car. They'd all put different bodies on and different engines, but they'd share the same floor pan, and that would save them a lot of money in coming out with a new model. Now, this is the latest product of that cooperation. It's the automatic version of the Alfa 164. It's a very important car for the British market because Alfa Romeo have significantly failed in the past to crack the executive fleet sector. If they can't do it with this car, they won't do it at all. And they hope to avenge with this model some of the disappointments of the past. This is a booted version of the familiar Saab 9000 hatchback, and in this form it's a very highly specified and extremely expensive vehicle. It's £28,000 on the road. £1,500 of that is taken up with a very sophisticated sound system that incorporates a CD player. Incidentally, it also occupies the space that would be taken up by the ashtray and cigar lighter, and there's a little discreet sign saying no smoking. That won't impress some executives I know. This is very much the flagship of the Lancia range. I've always called it the Thema, but I'm reliably informed I ought to call it the Tamer. In SE form, it's very well equipped up to the specification of the other two, and certainly very good value on the road. The only thing you can't get is an automatic gearbox with the turbo. But like the other two cars, it's got a 6-year anti-corrosion warranty. Now, while all these cars share the same floor pan and they've all got front-wheel drive, the designers have got very different ideas when it comes to power plants. The fuel-injected V6 in the Alfa is the most charismatic and the best-looking unit. There's a broad band of tremendous power and torque, and it mates well with the automatic. Saab's 2-litre 16-valve unit goes down the turbo road, but it's a poor match with its automatic. It seems to smother the power and hunts up and down when cruising. At Lancia's heart is another 16-valve 2-litre, but it's got a smaller, higher revving turbo, which gives a wider spread of power. The differences continue when it comes to luggage capacity. The Alfa suffers from a high sill and rather a narrow slot for inserting anything more than the standard Italian briefcase. The Saab's better, with the boot lid lifting well up out of the way, but like the others, it stores its spare wheel under the floor. Saab alone fit a narrow space-saver wheel, but at least that helps give it a much greater boot capacity. The Tamer, for instance, has 18.9 cubic feet, one more than the Alfa, but 5 cubic feet less than the Saab. The Alfa Romeo betrays the influence of the stylist on the interior much more than the other two. All the minor instruments and controls come together beautifully. It's also fitted with, in the Lusso model, electric rear passenger seats, although I note on this 7,000-mile example, one of them already doesn't work. And it also means that the seats can't fold down for extra rear luggage space. Scandinavian design has tended in the past to be rather austere and Spartan, but the interior of this Saab, with its supple Scottish leather and its English walnut, reminds you more of a Victorian gentleman's smoking club than anything. Despite that, it's the most comfortable of the three cars. Inside the Lancia, very Italian in feel, they trim it in Alcantara, a cloth that looks and feels very much like suede. There's lots of room for oddment storage in this car as well, in the door pockets down here, and it's also got the only glove box with space to rest your glasses of executive wine. So the cars are very different under the skin, but what are they like on the road? Let's find out. I've always loved the Alfa V6 unit. It's got a lovely exhaust snarl to it, and despite the automatic gearbox, it hasn't lost that appeal. The handling, well, that's flat and secure, big fat tyres, very high level of adhesion on the road. It's not all sweetness and light, though. It's got an over-large turning circle, this car, and I find these uniform switches on the panel rather confusing once you're on the move. On the road in the Saab, you're immediately aware that there is still some turbo lag. The classic situation, you come up behind a lorry, you pull out to overtake, put your foot flat on the floor, and there's a heart-stopping instant when it doesn't actually go. And then the turbo comes in and you accelerate through. On its big fat tyres, it's got extremely high levels of road holding and adhesion. In fact, it's the ultimate gentleman's express. In the Lancia, you're immediately aware of the tremendous power and torque from the turbocharged engine. There's less turbo lag than there was in the Saab, but because it's got a manual gearbox and there isn't the cushioning effect of the automatic, it's quite easy to get quite violent wheel spin when pulling away from a T-junction, especially on a wet road. But apart from that, the handling and the tyre adhesion is very high order indeed, certainly well up to the other two cars. It's very, very fast. I mean, it does 140 miles an hour, but if you want to go completely over the top, you can even double your money and buy a Ferrari engine version. So which car to go for? Well, in fact, it's quite a difficult choice for the lucky executive because all three cars have such distinct personalities. The Alfa is undoubtedly the best looking and the best style, but I resent this loss of an inch of headroom that Pininfarina has imposed in order to get those flowing lines. The Saab, well, it's very safe and secure, it feels very well built. And the Lancia, with its immensely powerful engine, represents tremendous appeal for the driver. Which one would I go for? Well, if my company would allow the extra £6,000 on the budget, I'd have to select the Saab. The Hawker Hunter, arguably the best proportioned and most beautiful fighter aircraft ever designed. Now, this particular prototype Hunter at the Aerospace Museum at Cosford enabled the famous test pilot Neville Duke to smash the world airspeed record back in 1957 when he hit 727 miles an hour. It's the lessons learned from the aircraft industry and from the wind tunnel that have given Vauxhall the chance to build the sleekest four-seater passenger car in the business. How have they done it? Well, the aircraft engineers discovered years ago that it's vitally important how the air exits a shape. And you can see how the Vauxhall engineers have taken at least 2 inches off from the wheel arches. The rear screen is much narrower than you'd expect, and that contributes to the classic teardrop shape for ultimate aerodynamics. At the side, they've got skirts, which gets you as close to ground effect as you can get in a production car. The other thing the aircraft engineers discovered, it's very important how the nose penetrates the air. Now, the distinctive shape of Calibra owes a great deal to this very low nose. They've achieved it through the use of headlamps that are only 2.75 inches in depth, and they've integrated the whole of the bonnet, the headlamps, the bumper, the spoiler, and most important of all, the undertray into one smooth moulding. Now, that gives Vauxhall a world-beating drag coefficient of 0.26, but that only applies to the 8-valve car. Most Calibras will be the more powerful 16-valve version. There they need a lot more cooling air, and they've opened up this grille, and that pulls the drag coefficient up to 0.29, about the same as a normal Cavalier. It's an example of the sort of artistic license that gets the marketing men a bad name and for which car manufacturers are notorious. Ford, of course, pioneered the market for coupes in Europe with the appearance of the Capri back in 1969. It was loosely based on Ford's highly successful American Mustang, and it was promoted as the car you've always promised yourself. The Capri was never that successful in rallying. Ford preferred to use the Escort or the Sierra, but GM had a different approach. Their Manta coupe enjoyed great success on the world rally scene until it was eclipsed by the four-wheel drive opposition. By 1987, both the Manta and the Capri were long in the tooth, and Ford were worried about the size of the coupe market, so they scrapped the Capri, while in the same year, GM gave the go-ahead for their Manta replacement, the Calibra. And if the demand so far is any indication of the future, GM were right and Ford was wrong. Vauxhall reckon on selling 5,000 Calibras by the end of the year, and that's more than the current best-selling coupe, Toyota's Celica, can manage in a full 12 months. So, if the product is right, the market is there, and Vauxhall have no intention of diluting the image of Calibra with cheap, low-powered versions, as Ford did with the Capri. But are the Calibra's good looks backed up by good handling? Well, on the track, I found high-speed cornering didn't give the sort of confidence I expected. But on the public road, it's different. It's hardly a sheep in wolf's clothing. The performance is pretty good. 0 to 60 around 8 seconds, and Vauxhall claim a maximum speed close to 140 miles an hour. Nice gearbox, positive change, and the driving position is good. I can get quite comfy in here. The seat's adjustable for height and rake, although we did manage to snap off the knob that adjusts the backrest. Ride and handling is very much as you'd expect for a car based on the Cavalier floor pan. It's a determined understeerer, and at high speed it's not quite as precise as you might wish. When you pull away from a T-junction, it's all too easy to get excessive wheel spin if you use a little bit too much throttle. Trouble with coupes like this, there's no room usually in the back seats. But sitting in the back of the Calibra, you've got to say there's plenty of leg and elbow and head room. You could contemplate taking 4 adults on quite a long journey in this car. I suppose I'd better get back to steering it. With the seat at the bottom of its height adjustment, there's adequate headroom for me, but there's a sunroof fitted as standard. Now, when you open it, the panel actually goes outside the car, and that saves those precious few inches. The one serious shortcoming is ventilation. Like many streamlined cars, there's no through flow of air, and the only way to get that is to have the fan on full almost all the time. As these sloping windscreens allow an awful lot of sunlight in here, it gets very hot and stuffy. In fact, in town, the only answer is to open a window. Now, a consequence of this sharply raked windscreen is that the pillar is some 3.5 inches closer to the floor than it would be in a standard Cavalier, and I'm always bashing my shoulder as I get out of the Calibra. I'm sure I get used to it. What I wouldn't get used to is this very sharp point on the quarter light, and when you're bending down quickly to undo the bonnet, for instance, I'm sure you only poke your eye out once on it. Under the bonnet is Vauxhall's well-proven 2-litre twin-overhead camshaft engine. It's in 16-valve form here, developing 150 brake horsepower, the same unit that's used in the Astra GTE and the Cavalier 2-litre GSI. Only real difference looking down at the engine compartment is that you can't see the road, and that's because of the aerodynamic undertray. At the back, this enormous rear door occupies fully 1/3 of the length of the car. It reveals an adequately big boot, nice little storage compartments either side, not very deep, and the space-saver tyre lives under the boot floor. Split rear seats which fold down to give an average capacity for the class of car. Now, we often complain about high loading sills on Top Gear. This time we really aren't joking. You've got to pick a heavy load up an awful long way to clear and get into the boot. So, overall, the Calibra is a fascinating marketing exercise. It's a very well-specified car. I'm absolutely delighted to see anti-lock brakes as standard right across the range. If you're looking for the ultimate in handling, well, it might be better to wait for the 4-wheel drive version that comes out later on this year. But Calibra is all about style. Now, the interior may look very much like a standard Cavalier, but the outside shape is absolutely stunning. It's going to do wonders for Vauxhall's image. So, in summary, the Vauxhall Calibra 16 valve scores well for its very stylish shape, the low drag body which gives good fuel economy, and it's a genuine 4-seater. On the debit side, the handling at the limit is a little unpredictable. There's a lot of road noise from the big tyres, and that high boot sill is distinctly awkward.
Talk of supercars and you think excitement and impracticality, the ultimate in performance, but nowhere to stow your golf clubs. Great style and drama, but an unwilling thoroughbred fighting to wrest control from the macho male behind the wheel. When the Japanese talk of supercars, it comes out differently. The NSX looks okay and performs brilliantly, but maybe the engineers have done too good a job and designed out the character one associates with a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. Maybe it's too much like a Porsche. That's not a 911, but a 944. Driving the NSX on the open road really is a very simple task. Honda wanted the car to be easy to drive, and certainly they've succeeded in doing that. All the controls are very standard, normal controls. Gear change, clutch, braking, it's all very light indeed. The engine has very good torque, which gives it great pulling power, so that second gear will take you from 0 to 90 miles an hour. In fact, it's too tall, so in some of these tight turns you need to drop down into first if you're hoping to enjoy some sporting performance. Really, it's rather too well house-trained for the public roads. After all, any supercar finds speed limits and narrow lanes hard to take. So the empty circuit at Alton Park was a welcome release, particularly as the multitude of journalists had wrecked the clutch on the only right-hand drive manual car in Europe. And that was only in 10,000 miles. Not the sort of reliability one expects from any sort of Japanese car. In creating their ultimate supercar, Honda have chosen a mid-engine layout with a 3-litre V6 engine mounted right behind the driver's seat. They've actually chosen not to go the turbocharged route, but instead the engine has all the very latest in high-tech engine design. There's variable timing, variable volume induction, and a sequential port fuel injection system. All this adding up to give the driver up to 274 horsepower as a maximum to play with. At the same time, they've tried to make the car as light as possible to make the very most out of this power that's available. They've created an aluminium monocoque, aluminium body panels, an aluminium suspension. All this to keep the weight down as much as possible. Even so, this package, when compared with its motor competitors, is still heavier than Porsche's 911 Carrera 2 and doesn't have as good a power-to-weight ratio as Ferrari's 348. The interior is very road car basic. It's a very simple layout, and there's nothing futuristic in the instrumentation of this supercar. Space-wise, well, there's plenty of room for the driver and the passenger, but there's no room at all for my briefcase and no little parcel shelf for any knickknacks. Elsewhere, there's precious little space also. Under the bonnet, there's only room for the radiator, the anti-lock braking system, and the space-saver wheel, which needs to be deflated before you can use it. In the middle of the car, well, there's the engine, and that takes up all that space. While around at the rear, there is a small boot, just enough room for my luggage, but if I have to put the punctured wheel in, it just about squeezes in there. The racetrack is the proper place to play with all this power, but it also demonstrates the VTEC variable timing system is really wasted on the public roads. It comes in at 6,000 revs, which is 60 miles an hour in second, but a highly illegal 90 in third. Having said that, it really is a beautiful engine to drive. With a rev limit just over 8,000 revs, there is that singing power from 6,000 all the way through. The braking is very, very good indeed. That four-pot, four-wheel ABS anti-locking working very well. And also the traction control system is very good indeed, only occasionally interrupting my power acceleration. Handling again, also very, very sure-footed, mild understeer turning in, and hardly a twitch of the tail as full power is added. So really, at smooth, high-speed driving, it's almost a faultless car. Of course, on a racetrack, you can try a little harder. And for preference, I would switch off the traction control system so I could slide the tail a bit more through the slower corners. Mild understeer, then I can put the power in, and then there's just a little wag of the tail as the rear wheel breaks its traction. Hard acceleration, third gear, 7,000. Third gear taking me to about 110 miles an hour before I need fourth gear. Back on the public roads, and straight away the supercar turns back into a saloon car. It really is a very, very easy car to drive. Everything is light, the controls easily come to hand. Now that was one of Honda's design criteria. They wanted to make a supercar that almost anybody could just get into and drive. And in that they've succeeded. It's as easy to drive as a Porsche's 944 S2. But then it does have all the impracticalities and lack of space of Ferrari's 348. So in a way, they've got either the best or the worst of both worlds. And it really depends what you're looking for when you're trying to buy a supercar.
£5 bid, 1 bid, 2 bid.
Over the last 10 years, car auctions have found a new respectability, like a sort of used car stock exchange. Not only have they become the ultimate barometer for prices, but a source of many of the cars that end up in the dealer's showroom. There's no mystery to it. The motor trade simply gives them a good wash and brush up and whacks a bit more money on the screen. It's easy, honestly.
So,
some car auctions can indeed be dumping grounds for the most appalling scrap ever to disgrace tarmac, but go to one of the bigger sites and you stand a very good chance of buying a perfectly respectable car that's as much as 40% less than you'd pay in a showroom. What you don't get at auctions are part exchanges, finance facilities, test drives or blow-dried salesmen. What you do get are bargain basement prices, like this 18 grand Porsche 911.
Or, if impressing the neighbours isn't your bag, then just 3,700 buys this J-plate Lada Samara. While the cynical eyes of the dealer can spot a good car at 200 yards, you'll have to be a shade more careful. Don't just go looking for any old motor, but have a specific model in mind and don't get distracted by all those cheap cars. Arrive with an hour or so in hand before the hurly-burly begins and you've got other buyers breathing down your neck.
Now, don't forget to carefully read the windscreen ticket. Not all auction companies use these, but the more open and helpful ones do. It can tell you vital information like, is the mileage warranted, has the vehicle ever been a total loss, or has it been seriously damaged, and it can tell you whether it's with a warranty or not. Now, don't put too much store by the warranty, because that only lasts an hour after the end of the sale and covers the major mechanical bits like the engine and gearbox and back axle. So if you get it home and you find your aerials broken off, that's just tough.
Nor should you be afraid to ask for the keys so you can crawl all over your prospect, just like the dealers do. You may not be able to move the car, but you can start it, so try the usual test for blue smoke from the exhaust.
This one seems okay. It's just got a light haze of blue smoke, which is permissible. Any more than that, and obviously it suggests engine problems. Next port of call is the glove box to see if we've got a service history. A full dealer service history can tell us a great deal, and we haven't got one here at all, just handbooks, which is a point against the car. Cars like this need to have a nice parade of rubber stamps in the service history. Next is the bodywork. Let's just take a quick tour, and on an E-Reg car like this, we're looking not so much for rust, but for accident damage. And before I've even so much as got out of the car, I've spotted some paint overspray here, which means that the front of the car's had an accident. If we look a bit closer, this bonnet is actually touching the wing, which means that this car's had a punch on the front. So we walk away.
You might reckon this G-plate 25,000-mile Peugeot 205 GTI is a snip at a smidgen under £6,000.
But if we look very carefully, we can see that the bonnet is a very slightly different shade of paint from the front wing, which alerts my suspicions. Look even closer, and I can just see white overspray on this indicator lens and this headlamp here, which means that the car's seen some action. So there's really no art or magic to it. It's just a question of beady-eyed observation.
Some cars you can virtually buy with your eyes shut, like these ex-rental Vauxhalls. Say ex-rental to most people, and there's a sharp intake of breath. But these nearly new tiny mileage cars are probably the best value, even after this unique form of interior washing. Buy this H-plate Cavalier for £7,000 here, or pay £9,000 on a dealer's forecourt, or £12,000 new. Your only worries with ex-rentals are the odd cigarette burn and service books that haven't been stamped up. Do make sure that the security code for the radio is still there too.
And you needn't worry about having the stigma of a rental car company name in the logbook. The rental boys quite properly realise that having names like Foot to the Floor Rent-A-Car in the registration document won't help the value of their used cars. So instead, they register them with corporate-sounding names like Provincial Securities Limited or BTI UK PLC.
At auction, however, the signs are obvious. Key fobs and rental litter abound. If the back registration plate shows a small numbered sticker, this was once an Avis car.
Another auction car which is more sinned against than sinning is the ex-company car or fleet car. Listen for the auctioneer to say the words direct. Direct cars are good news because they come directly from the last owner and are usually well maintained and well serviced. And that way, there's no shadowy middleman involved to lower the mileage and up the price.
This Sierra may have some leg on it, dealer's slang for high mileage, but at $2,400 it'll make someone a very cheap family hack.
Try and avoid the traders' cars entered specifically for a profit by smaller motor traders and dealers. You can recognise these by the beauty products. They're over-prepared. Notice the very glossy tyres and bumpers, an artfully positioned service book on the dashboard to tell us what a really good car this one is. At auction, you want to be buying a car at rock-bottom money and not paying someone else's wages for the week.
A sexy-looking Cosworth engine Mercedes 190E may look very tempting at $10,000, but tread carefully.
Prestige cars like Mercedes need to be mint with perfect paintwork and full dealer histories to make their money. But this one is what we call a repo or repossession, snatched back by the finance company from its owner because he couldn't afford the payments. Repos all too often lead hard lives, so you've got to ask yourself, if the previous incumbent couldn't afford to keep the payments up, what hope for the servicing?
Don't bother with schnorrers like these. For this sort of scrap, the auction hall is the last stop before the claws of the crusher. So much for what to look for. What about the bidding? All cars have a reserve price set by the seller, and the auctioneer has to coax as much money as he can from his sometimes moribund audience. When the trade isn't in the mood to buy, some auctioneers will invent false bids or even announce a car sold when there hasn't been a bid in the place. But this one found a buyer.
Well, it's not a practice that we encourage at our company. However, it does go on at other auctions, and we've got to face up to it. Speaking on their behalf, they would bring the hammer down on a vehicle that is unsold as sold, merely just to create the impression that the bids are flowing, that the sale is much livelier than often people anticipate.
If the bidding doesn't reach the reserve price, the car will be sold provisionally to the highest bidder. This means the auction company will ring up the seller, give him the bad news, and ask him if he'll take the lower bid. The old hands use signals to bid. Often the slightest twitch of an eyebrow is enough. You, being a novice, must make your bids obvious and keep eye contact with the auctioneer at all times.
We would advise them to make their bidding clear, make it quick, decide on what they're going to give, and don't give a penny more than that. Don't get carried away with the bidding fever as such and decide that, no, I will give a little bit more after all. Not the time in that 60 seconds, that's not the time to decide that.
So much for the theory. Let's do it for real. I'm drawn to this F registration Peugeot 405 because it's obviously a direct car. It's come straight from a company with no attempt being made to tart it up. It's a genuine 45,000 miler with the desirable automatic gearbox and 1.9 engine. It's got all the right bits and bobs, an electric sunroof, electric windows, electric mirrors, the very necessary power steering, and, most important, a service history. Okay, it needs a service, a valet. It's got a cracked headlamp and a thumbnail-sized dent in the boot lid. But that's the total of the bad news.
31, 32, 50, 33 in front of me now, 33, 50 bid, 33, 50 bid, 34 bid, 50 in front, 34, 50, 34, 55, 35, 50, 35 and a half, 6 bid, 36 in front of me now, it sells and goes, everybody else then. Sold you, Mr. W.
Down to me at 3,600.
Payment is the easy bit. Blokes like me usually have account facilities so we can pay by cheque, but you'll need a £200 deposit and to settle the balance with a banker's draft or building society cheque. I've added 25 quid onto the cost of the Peugeot to cover the indemnity, which is a sort of insurance policy against the car being stolen on outstanding hire purchase, written off or clocked.
Our Peugeot had a warranty, so we were quick to test it within the magic hour. But don't forget to arrange insurance before you leave the site.
So, here we are in our auction Peugeot, and it feels fine. The major mechanicals are fit, it's a proper car, and it looks and drives well. As far as money's concerned, we've had a right result. At £3,600, it's perhaps £2.5 grand less than some of my more rapacious brethren would charge from the showroom. So, back to my first question, are car auctions the motoring slaughterhouses that people think? Not from where I'm sitting. Good hunting.
Supermarket trolleys are a real triumph of design. They stack together when not in use, and they make ideal temporary dams and fish breeding containers in most of our local waterways. They also make excellent paint removers because, let's face it, their directional stability, especially when loaded, leaves a great deal to be desired.
Whoops. Well, this is one car that seems destined to have more than its fair share of shopping trolleys gouging down the side. It's Peugeot's new baby, the 106, and the Peugeot marketing whiz kids say that more than 65% of the 106 drivers are likely to be women. Now, that's hardly surprising when you consider that the Peugeot 205, the model that was introduced some 8 years ago and literally saved Peugeot from financial ruin, has always been a firm favourite with women.
The little Peugeot is aimed at the heart of the most important car segment in Europe, the small car market. In Britain, small cars took 26% of the total market last year, and their share is increasing. The vast majority of those, 2/3 in fact, were three-door hatchbacks, like this 106. Now, obviously, with such a huge market, there's going to be some intense competition. Bestseller in the sector is Ford's Fiesta, followed by Rover's Metro, the Peugeot 205, the Vauxhall Nova and the Nissan Micra. Those 5 cars make up more than 70% of the market, and it's those 5 the 106 has to crack if it's to succeed.
It's tempting to dismiss the 106 as yet another Euro buzzbox, but in fact it's a car with distinctive personality and it's great fun to drive. It doesn't have quite the same skateboard-like road holding of the 205, but it's very agile, holds on well in the corners and has more than adequate performance, a respectable top gear and a good 0 to 60 time. It's not enough to keep you ahead of the hot hatchback boy racers, but it's certainly more than enough to keep you fizzing around city streets, well up with the traffic.
There are 4 models in the range. This is the XR, fitted with the familiar 1124cc engine mated to a 5-speed gearbox. It's the same combination you find in the 205 and, incidentally, in Citroën's AX, a car which the companies swear blind is totally different to the 106, but in fact shares the same floor pan and over 1,000 components.
Very clean and neat design, but surely the stylists have done something wrong at the back end. Those rear light clusters, and especially the indicators, are just too small for modern traffic conditions. Lots of head, elbow and leg room inside the 106. The seats are very supportive and quite comfortable over long distances. And I particularly like the radio. It's been designed exclusively for the 106. That means there's no point in nicking it. It won't fit any other car. But one major grumble for a car allegedly designed with women in mind, whoever put in these ludicrous door handles? They're very stiff to operate. All the women I showed the car to complained vociferously about them and said they would break their fingernails.
Now, while the Peugeot 205 enjoyed great success, it did have a bit of a reputation for being flimsy. It tended to develop squeaks and rattles, and the crash repair boys take a dim view of its ability to absorb an impact. Peugeot were obviously keen that this perception didn't rub off on the new car. It's in fact a much sturdier body shell with more sound-deadening material in it, and they paid a great deal of attention to the way it's built. The dashboard, for instance, is assembled off the car and then inserted into the shell by robots to avoid shakes and rattles. It's a good-looking little car on the road. It appears wider than in fact it is, and it retains the 205 wheel-at-each-corner appeal. It's also very easy to drive, and already a lot of driving schools are looking at it with interest.
Peugeot say that fuel consumption is a major purchasing decision in this class. Sounds unlikely to me because most of the top small cars are very close together on consumption figures. While the 106 is good, it's not exactly light years ahead of the opposition. One thing they have changed, though, over the 205, they deleted that very useful 11-gallon tank and made this just 9.9. And I think that's a pity.
But don't run away with the idea that this is purely a town car. It performs admirably on the motorways. OK, it's a bit noisy at high speed with some engine boom and a fair bit of road noise, but I climbed out after a 200-mile cross-country run without feeling in the least stiff or cramped. It's a good, fun little car.
The new Astra will be appearing and disappearing on our roads for many years to come. Why? Well, it's 80% recyclable, so it's destined to be around in one form or another for a very long time. The Astra first emerged 10 years ago, and it's currently the 5th best-selling car in Britain. The new models have been developed on the floor pan of the old Astra, but from there on up, everything's different. This is the basic version of the Astra, the 1.4-litre 60 brake horsepower Merit. And although it's the base car, it still gets a 5-speed gearbox. All petrol-driven Astras have fuel injection and catalytic converters as standard. And although it's again base trim, it's very nicely finished and quite comfy. Back in 1985, the second-generation Astra was voted European Car of the Year, so the new model has a tough act to follow. Now, while Vauxhall obviously have their sights firmly set on the Escort in the UK market, the rest of Europe, General Motors, see Volkswagen's new Golf as the obvious target car. To that end, they've been spending a great deal of money at the Ellesmere Port factory to improve the fits and finishes of the panels on the new Astra. And looking at the way the front wing meets the corner of the door, they failed. Now, Vauxhall place great emphasis on the styling of the new Astra. They say they've borrowed extensively from the experience of the Calibra, the best-looking car they've ever made. Unfortunately, that's not true of this car. Despite the use of airflow management techniques in the sculpturing of the body, the rear dam and this lip to the hatch, this car has no better CD factor than the original shape. And I think that was much cleaner and crisper. There's no interior release for the hatch, and that's a bit inconvenient. They've lowered the parcel shelf, so rear vision is much better. And if you're off on holiday in the Alps, you've got plenty of room for the skis. They've extended the roofline back to improve rear headroom, but they've reclined the rear seats, and that leads to a rather uncomfortable seating position. Now, I always become irrationally angry when I straighten up from loading something and smack my head on the catch of the tailgate. In the Astra, it's high enough to avoid that, though I'm sure at some stage I'm going to crease myself on this fearsome tooth edge. Of course, not everyone's as careless as me. Major safety innovations in the new Astra. All the doors get high-tensile steel beams built into the frames, and that protects the occupants in the event of a side impact. And the seat belts are equipped with tensioners. That means if you do have an accident, they pull you tight back into the seat. Features like those are common across the wide range of Astra variants. There's cars, vans and estates, and there's a saloon version coming next year. Of course, the levels of interior trim vary widely. This is the 2-litre CD version. Nice bit of Ellesmere Port craftsmanship in the wooden door cappings, and the fascias look completely different from the old model and much more attractive. Particularly like the radio comes in 2 parts, so it's not worth stealing it from the car. It won't fit any other model. The 16-valve GSI versions get electronic anti-wheel spin control. You get the distinct feeling this version could use it as well. Power steering on this top-of-the-line model makes a big difference over the base Astra, which is a bit heavy. The steering itself doesn't adjust, and on a luxury specification model, I rather missed that. The car comes with a high level of equipment, manually controlled sunroof, electrically powered windows, and electrically powered mirrors. Even has a control for heating them in cold weather. Now, I'm a sucker for high gearing in cars. I hate going down motorways with the engine whining away up front. In that respect, the Astra is superb. At 30 miles an hour, it's only turning over at 1,000 RPM. Means at 70 miles an hour on the motorway, it's idling at around 2,300. And that makes for very relaxed cruising. Of course, means around town in the country lanes, you have to use the gears a lot more, but the gear change is so nice, you really don't mind. This model has a maximum speed of 121 miles an hour and hits 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds. The suspension's been tuned for better ride and handling, and it certainly feels even sharper than the high standards set by the old car. And another safety bonus, the bigger engine versions in the range all have a sophisticated 4-channel anti-lock braking system as standard. Obviously, with the fleet business alone, Vauxhall are going to do very well with the new Astra. But beyond that, it's a well-equipped, comfortable and safe motor car. Watch out, Escort. 10 years ago, Metro was launched as the make-or-break car for BL. The
And today, with it consistently at number 4 or 5 in the British top 10 bestsellers, there's a more relaxed and confident feel to the launch of a new Rover Metro. But this is no cosmetic facelift. There are significant changes to one of Britain's favourite cars.
One thing the old Metro was always crying out for was a new engine. Of course, the old A-Series was a faithful unit, but it first saw light of day in 1949, the original A40. It was getting a bit tired. Now, this is the K-Series, already winning international acclaim for its performance, its economy and its flexibility. You've already seen it in the 400 Rover. Here it is installed in the Metro engine bay, and of course the Peugeot 5-speed gearbox on the end of the engine instead of the gears in the sump, as in the old Mini and Metro system. They've done a very good job with the redesign of the interior of the new Metro. They've used very nice materials and fabrics. It's exceptionally well trimmed, and the redesigned dashboard and fascia looks very good indeed. It stems from the Rover philosophy of putting luxury car standards in small cars. At the rear, a restyled tailgate, nice new rear lamp clusters, and just as much boot space as you've got in the original Metro. They've broadened the Metro range with 12 models and 3 engines. This is the 1.1-litre 60 brake horsepower carburettor unit. There's a 1.4-litre 8-valve 76 brake horsepower carburettor version, and then the top of the range 16-valve 1.4-litre fuel-injected engine, which develops 95 brake horsepower. One of the major changes in the new Metro is to the seating position. Although you still sit very low in the car and these sills are quite obtrusive, it means that you're in line with the pedals and the steering wheel angle is right. It's a very comfortable driving position, and it puts right everything that was wrong with the old car. K-Series engine is very smooth and unobtrusive. I like the gear change in the new 5-speed gearbox in this 1.1S, and altogether it's a much more civilized and sophisticated way of making progress than the old Metro.
The car always had a rather harsh, choppy ride, but in this one they developed a new suspension system which interconnects the front and rear units. The result is a great success. The car's ride is transformed. It feels like a much bigger car. It soaks up bumps really well, and yet it doesn't allow float or roll. And in urban conditions, it hasn't sacrificed the steering accuracy or the handiness that the Metro has always enjoyed. Of course, the engineers are still constrained by the basic dimensions of the vehicle. There's not so much room, especially in the back, as some rivals. And why has it taken 10 years to put all these improvements into production? So the Metro 1.1S scores on its new engine, its nice 5-speed gearbox, excellent ride and handling, the interior trim, and that new seating position. Against it, well, the high sills make it awkward to get in and out, and the fuel tank's still too small, limiting the range, although they moved the filler cap up to a better position. And it's fiddly to remove the rear shelf and fold up the seats.
Thermoplastic olefin bumpers, auto changer, trace control, slip control, traction control, overdrive, 4IS independent suspension, ECS. Bamboozled? Well, so was I. I've just spent a week trying to unravel the Mitsubishi Sigma, possibly the most technologically complicated car I've ever come across. For £26,000, you're lucky to get windows as standard in a BMW. But the Sigma, which has to compete for a slice of the executive action without much in the way of badge prestige, has to rely on something else. To that end, it has a 3-litre 24-valve V6 engine, which develops 202 brake horsepower. It drives the front wheels through an automatic gearbox, and who said they were labour-saving? This has power and economy ratios as well as overdrive.
And this is by far the best behaved interior yet to emerge from Japan. The only questionable piece of taste must be this button-backed upholstery. And also, for such a large car, it doesn't feel quite as spacious inside in here as it should. But the toys are great. I've got cruise control, powered seats with memory, air conditioning, and the most fantastically complicated stereo.
There's the usual radio and cassette player gubbins, but there's a CD too, with its own auto changer in the boot. And if that's not enough, it has a wacky graphic equalizer as well. The end result of all these bits and bobs is a dash that you get the distinct impression would not look all that out of place in the pointy bit of a 747.
But there's more to this car than simple creature comforts. A lot more. And it all starts with this.
Called electronically controlled suspension, a driver can raise the car, which is useful in conditions like these, or engage sport mode, which drags the car down on its haunches, giving it a taut stance through the bends. It's clever stuff. Although the Sigma does without proper active four-wheel steering, as seen on the Galant, there's what's called passive rear-wheel steer. Mind you, its worth is somewhat negated by vague power steering. But this car's pièce de résistance, what sets it aside from BMWs and Mercs and so on, is its traction control system. Now this is all a bit complicated, so you'll have to bear with me, because it incorporates not only slip control, but also what Mitsubishi are calling trace control. What happens is one of 10 computers on board constantly monitors the amount of steering lock I apply, how much grip is available, and how fast I'm going. If it decides I'm going too fast, a large boxing glove springs out of the steering wheel and punches me in the face. No, I'm only kidding. What actually happens is it throttles back. It decides how fast I go around a corner. I don't. Disengage the system and cornering is a wild experience as the tyres scrabble to overcome my youthful exuberance. But when the system is on, even with my foot hard down in second gear, cornering is relaxed and safe, much to the relief of oncoming traffic. It's the same deal when setting off on a slippery surface. With the traction control turned off, there's lots of noise and fuss. But when it's on, after a brief flurry while the computer sorts itself out, the car sets off as though it's on a perfectly dry road. Now, all this stuff undoubtedly makes the Sigma a very safe proposition in difficult conditions. But what about the 364 days a year when it isn't snowy? The engine's pretty good. It pulls with not a hint of roughness, and top speed, for the record, is 140 miles an hour. And yes, it does have a catalytic converter. However, it's not a fun car to drive, not like a BMW anyway. The steering is just too vague, and I'm still not convinced that 200 horsepower and front-wheel drive make desperately happy bedfellows, trace control or no. Two questions remain. Why does it look like an old NSU R080? And who on earth called it Stigma? Sorry, Sigma.
This could be Britain's newest sport. We know that everyone in this country is football crazy and they like motorsport. Well, this is a mixture of the two. It's football without muddy boots, motorsport without tyres squeal. Invented in the north of England, like all good things, it's motorised football, called motorball. The vehicles used in motorball look a bit like overgrown dodgem cars or even small hovercraft. But they're ingeniously designed, simple to operate, and really quite unique. Well, these are the innards of this splendid contraption. Chris, you designed it. How does it work?
Well, it's a hydraulic drive system which is controlled by these two levers. Push them forward, the machine goes forward. Push them back, it goes back. One forward, one back, and the machine spins round in circles.
And what about the power unit?
It's a 5 horsepower, 4-stroke Kubota industrial engine, which is directly coupled onto the hydraulic pump, which powers the system.
And how many miles per gallon do they do?
Oh, I don't know about that, but it uses about 1 pint an hour.
Right, now's the big moment, the big match. The Top Gear team are going to take on you and your troop. Two large rubber balls are used, and these are made of the same polypropylene type of material as the bumpers on the cars. So let's have a look at the Top Gear team. I've been recruited as referee and linesman. Tiffany Dellop from Complaining As Usual. And what's this? Quentin Wilson inventing rules as he goes along. The experienced Goffey. He's covering for 6'4" Clarkson. And this is Janet Trin looking positively menacing here. The ball's thrown in. Mrs. Wilson. Needell stops it. An unconventional way of scoring a goal and against the spirit of the game. Clarkson again. It's hands again. That'll be disallowed, but it's a goal. Manufacturers team now have control of the ball. But here's a surprise. It's a substitution. The young striker, Nicky Fox, replacing Chris Goffey.
Right, let's go.
There are few rules in motorball, and it's a complete free-for-all here in the old Clapham Bus Garage, now normally used by Playscape as an indoor kart circuit. But getting out of the car is strictly forbidden.
Football crazy, he's football mad. The football has taken away the little bit sense he had. And
The gas from the Clapham Bus Garage off.
Oh, you've got to be joking.
That means I can have a go. Just familiarise myself with the controls first. Oops. Motorball is an ingenious idea, and it's already catching on with the paying public queuing up to have a go. It's all fantastic fun, but don't take it seriously. It's absolute chaos out here on the field. I don't know what the score is. I'm told it's 6-all.
Despite an aristocratic and upmarket image, the Range Rover makes a surprisingly sensible second-hand buy. A classic body shape that's endured virtually unchanged for 21 years. Add a non-dating registration and a used Range Rover can look like new. Buy a 7-year-old example for £5,000, stick on a plate, and only the experts can tell it's not £30,000 worth. Some of the best people have bought and run second-hand Range Rovers, and for some, it even led to a contract to do a touch of promotion.
I had my first one in 1974 when I bought a second-hand one for £2,000, and I had it for 2 or 3 years and sold it for pretty much the same amount of money thereafter. And really I've been doing the same thing with Range Rovers ever since. And now I suppose I drive, 25, 40,000 miles a year in the vehicle, depending how much I'm in this country and how much I'm overseas. And I suppose it's got an upmarket image, but I drive it because I enjoy driving the vehicle, not because of what people may think of me or the vehicle or anything else.
The Range Rover is definitely the ultimate four-wheel drive vehicle. You know, you don't see members of the royal family and, you know, the sort of upper echelon of our society driving about in Daihatsus or Shoguns or Troopers. The Range Rover is the thing, and I think really that to appreciate the quality of it, I think it's very, very important to look at one on a ramp. If you sort of inspect the underside of it, you realise what you're getting for your money.
Range Rover dealers may offer potted palms and peace of mind, but there's no need to pay these highly polished showroom prices if you know what you're looking for.
Should paint it all over.
The Range Rover isn't like a car, it's more like a van. So look for signs of hard work in some unexpected places. This example had a lot of filler on the roof, suggesting some clumsy roof rackery, poorly repaired. Always stand on the sill and check the entire roof area.
Look along here. All runs on the lack a lot. Yeah. Big painting all over, isn't it? Don't want to put filler in it.
Mechanically, the Range Rover is very strong. Its heart is a marvellous V8 engine, which is good for 200,000 miles, if properly maintained. Neglect and abuse it, and it can deteriorate very quickly. Pull out the dipstick and look at both the quantity and the quality of oil in the sump. Here it's dirty and black and obviously hasn't been serviced for some time. It's also halfway down the dipstick, so this may have engine problems on the horizon. Watch for a discharge of blue smoke on startup, which could mean that the engine is burning oil and worn. And while you're at it, listen for the tappets at the top of the engine. A loud ticking is not a good sign. This one sounds perfectly healthy. Take a good long look at the bodywork and check for scratches, dents, stone chips and rust blisters. And have a good look at those slab-sided doors as well. They're very vulnerable to parking dents from jealous Cortinas. But pay particular attention to the tailgate, which is the Range Rover's notorious rust trap. Most elderly examples will have had 1, maybe even 2 replacement tailgates at some time. On this one, you can just see it's beginning to go down here, and although it's not too bad, it'll need a replacement within a couple of years. A fully stamped service history is a must on a used Range Rover. It can add up to £1,000 to the second-hand value. Not only does it show you how well the car's been maintained in its life, it can also prove that the mileage is genuine. Range Rovers get clocked like everything else. And while you're here, have a good look at the interior. Range Rovers get used in mucky and muddy conditions, and some of it rubs off. Pay attention to the seats. They can fray and tear. Some of the electrical controls can test the patience of a saint. Handles break off. In fact, on some of the earlier 1980 examples, the trim could have been made of papier-mâché and worn better. You see, you have to remember that the Range Rover was made and designed by the same people who made the Allegro, and you might even recognize the odd bit here and there. That door handle down there, that's genuine 70s Morris Marina.
Speed is not the Range Rover's strong point. By today's standards, the 3.5-litre model is as quick off the mark as the Archbishop of Canterbury in full regalia, but it does make an effortless motorway cruiser. Petrol consumption is a major downside, and if you enjoy yourself, reckon on 15 to the gallon.
Always insist on a test drive and keep your senses peeled for those expensive clonking noises. Coil springs can break, shock absorbers can break, and you can get wear in the drive shafts. So try the throttle on-off technique like this. If there's a lot of banging and clunking, you know you've got expensive bills to come.
While the majority of Range Rovers never go near a ploughed field, there's always the odd one that imagines it's a Land Rover. If you think your potential purchase might have done a spot of mountaineering, be extra wary for rust, chassis and body damage. There are a wide range of specifications: 2-door, 4-door, Vogue and special equipment, automatic and manual transmissions, but which makes the best buy?
In my opinion, I think there's no substitute for the special equipment model, which obviously one's got all the creature comforts of leather, air conditioning, sunshine roof, electric windows, electric seats. I mean, electric seats on a four-wheel drive vehicle is absolutely incredible. You know, you get into it, you've got the same panache there as you have with the Rolls-Royce. You can, you know, sort of adjust the seats and play with your air conditioning, get the sunshine roof open. Absolutely super. That is definitely the king among its peers.
If you fancy a diesel Range Rover, remember that while you'll get better fuel consumption figures, they're considered noisy, underpowered, and not that refined. There's never been a better time to buy a used Range Rover. Traditionally, the company director's toy, some companies are now shedding cars and directors like there's no tomorrow. The current recession has made used Range Rover prices the lowest for years.
Rest assured, whichever model you choose, you'll own a versatile, practical and individual machine that's built to last. And you never know when such versatility might come in useful.
Soon after the Golf launch in 1974, a group of engineers dropped a fuel-injected engine into one, convinced a sceptical management to build a limited number, and invited some journalists, myself included, to drive them round the Hockenheim race circuit. Thus was the GTI born, and to date they've sold over 1 million.
Now, it wasn't long before other motor manufacturers started to cast envious eyes at this new market opportunity, and when Ford changed the Escort over from rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive, they rapidly included an XR3 high-performance version. Now, this is the latest in a long line of XR3s, which became Britain's best-selling hot hatches.
The new car looks very much like the RS2000, launched last year, though without the bonnet bulges. With 5-spoke alloys, colour-coded bumpers and a distinctive rear wing, the shape looks understated and attractive.
Ford have gone to great lengths to differentiate the XR3i from the standard Escort. You get this nice leather-rimmed wheel, a special instrument panel with very clear and easy-to-read dials, and these lovely supportive wrap-round seats. I was a bit disturbed to find that Ford had fitted this test car with 600 quid's worth of very nice CD, cassette and radio player. For the most stolen car in Britain, that's quite a liability, and to protect it, I noticed the radio units are code protected, the glass is engraved all the way round with the car's registration number, and it's fitted with the Ford alarm. And that's just as well, because the hot hatch accident and theft rates are truly appalling. The result, premiums are sky high. A 25-year-old in London would have to pay around £2,000 a year to drive this car. At that rate, there'll soon only be feasible propositions for old men in Scotland. The XR3i has been a bit of a stranger in Ford showrooms since September 1990, when the new range of Escorts was launched. Now, Ford decided that they couldn't put out the XR3 with the old CVH engine. It was just too rough in comparison with the competition. They wanted to wait until this was in production at their Bridgend factory. It's the first production example of Ford's new twin-overhead camshaft 16-valve Zeta family of engines. Now, Ford's put an awful lot of money and effort into developing these engines, which they say will power a full range of Ford cars right through the 1990s. First engine they designed entirely for catalyst, fuel injected. In this form, it's 1.8 litres, 130 brake horsepower, or if you've got trouble with your insurance company, 105 brake horsepower. Now, obviously, we wouldn't attempt to assess the road holding and handling of such quick cars on the public roads. That's why we've come here to the test track to see how these cars perform in extremis. Now, you may argue that you wouldn't drive the car like that anyway, but there's always that situation that may arise where you need to take emergency avoiding action, and that's when you want to know how a car performs. As soon as you get underway, you realise this is a seriously quick car, a maximum speed of around 126 miles an hour, so it's got to have the road holding and the braking to cope with that. And as you'd expect from the Escort's performance heritage, it certainly does. Violent lane changes are handled with poise and stability, and even near the limit, whoops, there's no traps for the unwary. If there is a criticism, it concerns the power steering. The car reacts more quickly than you'd expect to small movements of the wheel, so instead of holding a smooth, steady line through a bend, you end up making a whole series of tiny corrections. But that's a minor car overall. Road holding and handling are excellent. Well, you have to say the new Escort XR3i is a very smooth and very quick car. I'm not convinced that the new Zeta engine package is all that marvellous. After all, we've had a lot of twin-cam 16-valvers around for a long time now. But the major point against the car is its price. It's almost £15,000. Now, last time we saw the XR3i, that was back in 1990, and it cost £11,250. That's an awful lot of inflation, even if you do get more car for the price. Now, that price looks even less of a bargain when you compare it to the latest Volkswagen Golf GTI in 3-door, 8-valve, 2-litre form. This is almost £1,000 cheaper. As we've told you before, the new Golf is stronger and heavier, but those wide rear pillars do restrict rear three-quarter vision. At both front and rear, there are new crumple zones and the floor pan is strengthened. The doors get side impact protection beams, and the whole car passes the tough new 1993 US crash standards that many manufacturers are struggling over. Why all the emphasis on safety? Well, VW researchers now say that it's the prime buying criteria for German drivers. Although the shape and interior of the Golf is new, it shares the same floor plan as the old Mark II. However, the suspension's been extensively changed. It's lower, front and rear, and the wheels are slightly further apart. This power steering is rather heavier than the old car. It all adds up to a feeling of weight and security when you're driving it on the road. The company also says that the new setup has eliminated torque steer. That's an annoying condition in very powerful front-wheel drive cars. When you change down and put your foot down, the car pulls from one side to the other. Doesn't happen in this one. With all this extra metal work and the attention to safety, you might think that the Golf has lost some of its original agility and sparkle. In fact, that's not true. This car reacts just as well to the steering wheel as that original old Mark I did round the Hockenheim circuit.
Even better, in fact. The GTI holds its chosen line to the inch, and on high-speed curves it feels totally stable and unruffled. It's also very quiet at speed, thanks to the aerodynamic shape and the efficient door and window seals.
Obviously a lot of competition in the field, and if it's pure performance you're after, look no further than Nissan Sunny GTI. It's considerably quicker than the Escort, both in terms of maximum speed and acceleration. Costs roughly the same price.
Now included in that price are anti-lock brakes, an expensive option on the Ford and the VW. I think it's little short of criminal for manufacturers not to fit anti-lock as standard to cars of this performance. Full marks to Nissan for doing so. They're also an option on Citroën ZX Volcan, but with similar performance to the others and a much superior ride comfort, it does represent excellent value for money at some £2,000 less than the XR3i.
If you spent around £20,000 or maybe even more on a high-performance road car and want to enjoy it to the full, you've either got to get on a racetrack or leave England and head for the autobahns of Germany. For this trip, we chose the Rover 220 Coupe Turbo, the fastest production car Rover's ever produced. On offer for only £18,400, this was a car to measure alongside the best in class from Ford and Vauxhall, the Escort Cosworth and Calibra Turbo. High-performance cars at a reasonable cost. Now I'm relaxed and comfortable and cruising at 130 miles an hour. I'm not going to look at the camera or take my hands off the wheel, but it's perfectly safe in this high-performance car and perfectly legal on this quiet German autobahn. So often after accidents you hear that the cause was that people were driving too fast. But it's always a question of driving too fast for the conditions. Too fast round a corner, too fast in a built-up area. On a quiet English motorway, 80 miles an hour may well be perfectly safe. Whilst when it's busy, 70 miles an hour might be too fast. If it's raining, 50 miles an hour might be too fast. If it's foggy, 30 miles an hour might be too fast. But speed should always be related to the conditions. Indeed, the Rover at 130 miles an hour was relaxed and confidence-inspiring on the smooth autobahn. It was stable passing slower traffic, and because the Germans are used to these high speeds, the lane discipline is excellent. But as the traffic builds up, you do need to ease back. So the Rover's very impressive for high-speed cruising. But what's it like around country lanes? Let's take the scenic route. 200 horsepower driving the front wheels can be an embarrassment under some conditions, but the Rover power plant has a beautifully smooth delivery that almost belies the fact that it's turbocharged. But it needs plenty of cooling, and the noisy fans were a real irritation at slower speeds or in traffic. Handling around the tight hairpin bends didn't show the Rover at its best. Heavy, dead steering gave little feel. And was that wheel spin I detected? When this Turbo Coupe was launched, I was impressed when I heard it had traction control. But it hasn't. Well, it has if you count an advanced Torsen limited slip differential. But in modern terms, this is not traction control. In Damon Hill's Williams, or even in a humble Ford Mondeo, the latest traction control means you can't spin the wheels and burn rubber. Electronics sense when the tyres are about to slip, and they then reduce engine power to prevent wheel spin. Of course, there are other reasons than unrestricted autobahns for going to Germany, and this is one of them. The Nürburgring is the best driver's circuit ever built, and it's open to anyone. And so, out onto this old Nürburgring circuit. We've paid our 15 marks, just, what, £5, and we're now going to do a lap of this wonderful track and really see how this Rover performs. Into these tight corners, second gear. The Rover turns in very well as we power out, though. traction good on that corner. Heading now down to Adenauer Bridge, one of another famous landmarks of the circuit. Braking on the Rover needs a lot of pressure, but they work very well indeed. We flick left and right, uphill. Well, we're about halfway around the Nürburgring now, and I'm in two minds really about the Rover. The ride is very good. It takes all these little bumps and undulations at high speed very well, but cornering, the actual handling, well, there's understeer as you'd expect with the front-wheel drive, but unlike the Calibra, it's not very predictable. There isn't very good feedback through the steering. It doesn't give the driver that satisfaction that I look for. Now this climbing approach to the carousel, you always aim for Jackie Stewart's tallest tree. So if we aim for that straight at the tall tree, it leads you into the carousel. This banked corner, bumpy concrete, but a real feature of the Nürburgring. The driving position on the Rover isn't that good, to be honest. Although I can get my legs comfortable, there's no telescopic adjustment on the steering wheel. So, as with the Vauxhall, I can't quite get the arm lengths right. Also, the seats, nice leather, but that's not what you need on a racetrack. They don't really hold you that well either.
But then, the Rover wasn't designed for the unbridled pleasure of driving around 13 miles of the glorious Nürburgring. As a fast road car, it's attractive, well-built and very quick in a straight line. But the spongy steering and unpredictable handling has taken away much of the fun. It beats the Vauxhall Calibra for its stylish interior, but for driver satisfaction, give me the Escort Cosworth any day.
If I were to give you unlimited money, what car would you buy?
Ferrari, no doubt about it.
A red Ferrari.
Had to be a Ferrari, wouldn't it?
A red sports car. I think I would buy a Ferrari. Ferrari, wouldn't it?
Odd, isn't it, that just about everyone in the world would chop off an important limb or two if it meant they could have a Ferrari? And yet the so-called experts, the people who write about cars like this in the motoring magazines, are forever telling us that you could never live with one on a day-to-day basis, that its fiery Latin temperament would be all too much after a while. Well, that may be the case with the F40, but what about the 348 here? It only costs a miserable £76,000. Surely you could live with one of these every day of the week. Well, there was only one way to find out, and yet again I had to sacrifice myself in the name of this programme. I had to drive around in this for a week. A lot of people ask these days why on earth you would spend all the extra money to buy a Ferrari when for a whole lot less you could have something like a Nissan 300 ZX. They'll tell you that it's every bit as fast, that it's just as striking, and that it's a whole lot easier to drive, and they're right. But a Nissan 300 is not a piece of motoring folklore. In a morning, you'd probably expect a Ferrari to be harder to coax into life than Lazarus, or a nightclub bouncer. But with fuel injection, it's up and running the instant you turn the key. Turning the wheel is a deal harder, but once extricated from its overnight slot, I was off for another day of soaking up the admiring glances, snarling past people at 30 miles an hour in a car that can top 160. Daft?
Yes, of course, but surely only as daft as buying a four-seater and then spending 90% of the time all on your own in it. You could certainly never accuse the 348 of wasting space. Now, I fit just fine, but Yuletide foliage, well, that's another story. Squeezing things into a Ferrari, then, is hard work. But squeezing the Ferrari through things is not as hard as you might imagine. The visibility's good, but from time to time I did wish other drivers would give it a wider berth. Mainly because if it had been damaged, someone would have come and taken it away. I'm not going to pretend that a Ferrari's easy to drive. This is not heavy, this is my clutch. Same goes for the steering, and the gearbox can be a bit recalcitrant first thing in the morning. So no, the Ferrari is a pain when you're in a traffic jam. But all cars are a pain when you're in a traffic jam. The difference is, in a Ferrari, you can at least dream of the day when absolutely nothing else would do.
Take these two 16-valve Golf GTIs. One's an 87 E-Reg with 60,000 up, the other a few months old with just a handful of miles on the clock. Put them on the Bruntingthorpe test track, safely away from the public roads, bury the throttles and watch the difference. Some cars grow old disgracefully, but the GTI loosens up in its middle age and just gets better and better. For all its miles, the older car goes like a banshee, and at the end of the 2-mile straight, there's a clear 6-car lead for the sober machine.
Often imitated, but rarely bettered, the Mark II Golf GTI still remains the longest lasting and best handling car in its class. At 60,000 miles, this 16-valve feels like it's just run in.
For £4,000, what this one cost, here's a car which can chew the coattails of supercars 5 times the price.
This is an early Mark II GTI, an 84B, and a car like this today would cost between £2,000 and £2,500, and most of them look as straight and as original as this.
Body stripes and alloy P wheels distinguished the earliest Mark IIs, along with what the Germans considered to be a cheerful interior, but amazingly they still had left-hand drive wipers. By late 1987, the wipers were the right way round. The P-wheels, alas, became an option, and side body mouldings appeared too. The interior, however, was a lot less garish. Leggy 87s start at £3,000, rising to 4 and a bit for a really proper car. Good value when you think an F-Reg Cavalier would relieve you of nearly £6,000. And the Mini Wonder Wagon, the 16-valve, offers the best value of the lot, capable of 30 to the gallon and 125 miles an hour.
16-valve spotters will be keen to note the forged alloy wheels, slightly lower ride height, rakishly angled roof aerial, and these little catch me if you can 16-valve badges on its bottom.
The interior's gloomy and the non-assisted steering heavy, but the multi-valve GTI has to be the performance car bargain of the year. This 30,000 miler would give you change from £5,000, and you can forget the rumours of unreliability.
basically the 16 valve does use oil when it's brand new, and it will use oil if it's used, you know, high revs all the time. I mean, initially the rings don't seal until they've done about 10,000 miles, but we found a 16 valve that's probably done 80,000, we use no oil at all.
As for the grim subject of insurance, we got it down to £470 fully comped for a 30-year-old living in Leicester, and that's for the 16-valver. 1990 16-valve cars come with BBS wheels, rounded bumpers and power steering as standard. If you can run to it, 7,000 buys a fine G-plater. Don't skimp on tyres though. Michelin MXVs just grip and grip and grip.
Be on your guard for stolen recovered GTIs. There's quite a few of them floating about. Now, while they're not the end of the world, and usually it's just a question of a missing radio, maybe missing seats and wheels, you can always tell a stolen recovered by the fact that it'll have more than one key, because the ignition lock and the doors have been forced. This one is a rather radical example. It's been picked clean, but it'll probably go back on the road again because it's fundamentally a straight shell. It's far better than something like this, which is a damaged, repaired GTI and has just come out of the paint shop. When you're buying a second-hand GTI, think accident, and there are certain places on the car which can tell you if it's had any drama or not. Down here, where the wing meets the bulkhead, is a favourite.
If it's had a frontal biff, you'll see creases where the wings hit the screen pillar. Check the door gaps too. You could drive a coach and four through this one. Opinions vary on body kits, but I reckon they're often there to hide a multitude of sins.
Under the bonnet is where you'll find most of the clues. If we look under this one, the first thing that alerts my suspicions is that little yellow sticker down there belongs here, which means that the bonnet's been painted. Look a bit closer and we can see it's a very orangey peely finish, and then in this little hole I can see signs of the original Tornado red, which means that this bonnet's been put on and resprayed.
Inspect the inner wings and the bulkheads for signs of distortion, flaking paint and recent repairs. These white stains are signs of rubbed-down filler, and tatty insulation like this means someone's been here before you.
Now, I've nothing against damage repairables per se on two conditions. The first is that you know it's a car that's been repaired, so you pay damage repairable money. And secondly, that the job has been well done. In the case of GTIs, they need to be jigged, and if it hasn't been jigged properly, it will never, ever handle or corner right.
Jigs are used to align a distorted body shell to a precision of millimetres, so walk away from anything that's been bodged. Of the 500,000 Golfs sold in Britain, 100,000 have been GTIs. So there's a huge infrastructure of independent specialists who'll service the thing for around 85 quid a throw. If it's a 16-valver, run it on super unleaded with synthetic oil and change the cam belt every 60,000 miles. If, like me, you find your local Volkswagen Audi parts department can't help with sensibly priced trim parts, panels, bumpers, light clusters and wheels, and some of them really are mad money, I know a man who can. This place may not look much, but it's stacked to the rafters with second-hand GTI parts, all of them perfectly usable and less than half price. He's called Horace, and his grills cost £45 against VW's 141. 50 quid buys you a tailgate, VW want 172. A seat will make you sit up at £700. Horace says it's yours for 25.
Parts which you should buy from VAG are mechanical things, like exhausts. Now, this is a copy exhaust, but the original exhaust is fitted to the GTI is capable of lasting up to 4 years and 80,000 miles, so it's a false economy to fit anything else. Cheaper ones don't last as long, affect the performance, and make more noise.
And if it's performance you're after, the GTI lends itself extremely well to specialist tuning. This 16-valve is bored out from 1.8 to 2 litres, developing an extremely healthy 179 brake horsepower. To you and me, that means a highly illegal 135 miles an hour. Judging by their image on the street, most people reckon they're plenty quick enough in standard tune.
Oh, the street image of the GTI is just cool, way out. It's got nothing, you know, they've got 16 valve is in no class with any other car on the road. Astra 16 valve, XR3i, XR2s, RS turbos, you know, the image of the 16 valve is way out compared to them. The mileage on mine is 36,000. The engine is just loosening up now already. Right now, I don't want anything else. I'm quite happy with the 16 valve.
Time was you had to pay serious money for a Golf GTI, but since grown inspiring insurance premiums have all but decimated the hot hatch market, they're all over the place. Here we are at a Midlands auction site, and we're falling over the things. There are 5 in here and 8 outside. Today, this pretty E-Reg 87 50,000-mile 8-valve GTI has sold for a very cheap $28.50. My guess is that they won't stay this cheap for long. So now's the time. Get out there and get amongst it.
The Sana is the first of Yugo's in-house concepts and a complete breakaway from the previous Fiat 127 derivatives, although it does have a hint of Uno about it. Not surprising, as it was styled by Giorgio Giugiaro, who was responsible for the Uno, as well as, amongst others, the Volkswagen Golf and the Lotus Esprit. It comes as a well-equipped, roomy 5-door hatchback, and at £5,500, it's in the Fiesta, Metro and Nova price bracket.
The first thing you notice about the Yugo is the amount of space in the car. It really is in the Escort Cavalier range. A lot of space, and also apparent plushness of the seats. And all, there's a lot of good modern features. When you turn the ignition on, the check panel illuminates to display areas of the car it monitors, such as brake pad wear and rear lamps. Then, when driving along, anything open, such as a door, it shows up. Although the check panel does show me the door open, there are a few things missing. It doesn't tell me if I've left the choke out, which is most important these days. Also, there's no clock anywhere in the car, which I found a bit frustrating. The seatbelt alignment is comfortable, good for all driving positions, but the seat adjustment needs a very strong grip in order to move it. Not the best. In the rear, plenty of space still, and even with the driver's seat fully back, plenty of legroom. A nice little armrest in the centre provides a bit more luxury, and there's 3 sets of seat belts, so it's really a genuine 5-seater. One major problem, though, is the fact that these child belts or rear belts, they're not inertia real, so with all this belt lying around, and they're supposed to hang up, but the hook's already broken. In the boot, again, plenty of space. But one thing, a rather high sill, making it difficult to get heavy bags in. Under the carpet, spare wheel and jack. Also, rather nice little toolkit. One thing, however, that could be rather dangerous, especially with young children around, is these rather weak struts, making it a little bit dangerous. Power is from the 1.4-litre, 70-horsepower Fiat Tipo engine. And later this year, they expect to have a 1.6-litre version and automatic transmission. Under the bonnet, spacious simplicity. Obviously, easy to maintain. On the road, the Yugo's surprisingly good. The performance from the 1.4-litre engine is lively and well up to scratch in its class. Acceleration for overtaking good, also high-speed cruising. The suspension is quite firm, almost semi-sports suspension, and this gives good handling characteristics, but it's a shame that the steering itself is rather heavy with a rather dead feel, and there won't be any power steering option available. The gear change, again, front-wheel drive, slightly spongy, but always a positive location into the gear I want. The controls themselves, I have these paddle switches, fingertip controls, which is rather unusual. The wipers on the right, indeed a rather pleasant single wiper, which I rather like. On the left there's the headlamps, and there is a small possibility of occasionally, when you go to indicate right, as happened to me once last night, of knocking all the lights off. But that's something I think you'd soon get used to not doing. On the instrument panel itself, I don't particularly like the 5 needle matchstick indicators, which look like a mass of artificial horizons, and at one glance, they're all pointing in different directions. So I'm not a particular fan of that. But otherwise, it provides all the information you'd want.
The good points about the Yugo Sana are its low cost, the fact that it's well equipped and comes with a 24 months unlimited mileage warranty, as well as a 3-year anti-corrosion warranty.
Working against it are poor attention to detail, that heavy steering, and also Group 4 insurance.